Seraphine Ashwood had always known her place in the pack. She was an Omega, the lowest rank, the kind of girl people looked through rather than at. Her father had been a rogue who left before she could walk, and her mother had died of a fever when Seraphine was 9 years old. She had grown up in the eastern quarter of Black Iron territory, in a small stone cottage with a garden she kept alive through sheer stubbornness and too much time alone. She was not beautiful in the way that stopped people in hallways. She was quiet, careful, and grounded, the kind of person who noticed when the light changed in the afternoon, and always remembered how you took your tea. She had a habit of talking to her plants, not because she thought they could hear her, but because it made the silence feel less heavy. She had never expected a mate bond. Girls like her, she had told herself, did not get chosen by the moon goddess for anything special. She had made peace with that, or something close to peace. And then, on the night she turned 18, she walked into the great hall of the Black Iron Pack for the gathering, and Alpha King Darian Voss looked up from across the room, and everything changed. She felt it before she understood it. A warmth beneath her ribs, like a coal someone had quietly been keeping lit for years. The world did not stop, the way people in stories said it did. It just became very clear, the way air becomes clear after rain. She looked at him and thought, with a strange, calm certainty, "Oh, it is you." He looked at her too. For a moment, just one, something moved across his face. Then it was gone, and he looked away, and she spent the rest of that evening standing near the wall, pretending she was not aware of exactly where he was in every room. That was 14 months ago. In the time that followed, they were not a love story. They were something more uncomfortable than that. He acknowledged her privately, told her the bond was real, told her he was aware of it, and then proceeded to treat that awareness as a problem to be managed, rather than a gift to be opened. He kept her at a careful distance. He was never unkind. He was, in his way, almost gentle, but he would not let her close, and she felt it every day, that invisible wall, warm on her side and cold on his. She told herself she understood. He was the Alpha King. He carried the weight of 5 territories. He did not have the luxury of softness. She told herself these things, the way you tell yourself a coat fits when it is one size too small, often enough that you almost believe it. And then came the night of the winter gathering, and she dressed in her dark green dress and her grandmother's earrings, and she walked into the great hall with her head up, and Darian Voss looked at her from the center of the room, and she realized too late that the look on his face was not warmth. The hall went quiet before he even opened his mouth. Packs are good at reading the temperature of a room. 300 wolves felt something coming before it arrived. He said her full name, Seraphine Ashwood. The formality of it hit her before the words did. He said he was severing the bond. He said he was rejecting her as his mate. He said she was free to go. She heard the words. She understood each one individually. It took several seconds for them to arrive in her body, and when they did, the pain was physical and absolute. The warmth beneath her ribs went out like a candle in wind, and the absence of it was so sudden and so complete that her legs buckled and she went down, one knee on the stone floor, one hand pressed to her chest, trying to find the thing that had just been taken. No one moved toward her. She was aware of the silence. She was aware of 300 people watching. She did not cry. She could not have explained afterward why not, except that something in her went very still at the center of the storm, and that stillness held her upright where her legs had failed. A girl appeared at her side. Pell, 16 years old, the smallest of the pack's young Omegas. She said nothing. She simply put one arm around Seraphine's waist and helped her stand, and walked her toward the door with the quiet, serious competence of someone who understood that some things cannot be fixed and can only be witnessed. Outside, the cold air came in sharp and clean. The moon was full above the tree line, enormous and white and indifferent. Seraphine breathed it in. She told Pell she was all right. It was not true, but it was the kindest thing she could offer, and Pell seemed to understand both parts of it. When Pell went back inside, Seraphine stood alone on the stone steps and looked up at the moon. She did not feel anger. She searched for it, the way you search a coat for something you thought you put in the pocket, and came up empty. What she felt was a grief so large and so quiet, it had no real shape. She had not done anything wrong. She had only been exactly who she was, and who she was had not been enough. she said, very quietly to the sky. "I do not know what I did, but I am still here." The moon did not answer. The air was still, but something, somewhere shifted. She did not know about what happened to him until Pell came to visit 2 weeks later. By then, Seraphine had packed a bag and gone to her aunt's cottage on the eastern edge of the territory. She had spent the first 3 days in bed, not weeping exactly, just resting in the wreckage, the way you do when something large has fallen, and you are not yet ready to look at what is left. On the 4th day, she got up and went into the garden. There is something reliable about soil and roots and things that grow regardless of what is happening inside the house. She found it that day, and returned to it the day after, and the day after that. Pell arrived on a gray afternoon and sat across from her at the small kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and said without preamble, "His wolf is gone." Seraphine set down her cup. Pell explained what she had heard. At midnight, the night of the rejection, Alpha King Darien Voss had reached inward for his wolf, the great black wolf called Kale, that had anchored him since childhood, and found nothing. Not sleeping, not silent. Gone. He had not been able to shift since. The elders had been summoned. Elder Marin had consulted the old texts and come back with an answer that no one in living memory had ever had cause to look for. The moon goddess, the text said, wove mate bonds herself, in the time before time. When such a bond was broken by choice rather than by death, she had the right to reclaim the wolf of the one who broke it. Not as punishment, as consequence, as a mirror held up to the act. "The wolf is the part of you that recognizes a mate," Marin had told him. "You rejected the recognition." She took back the instrument. Seraphine was quiet for a long time after Pell finished speaking. Then she asked, "Is he all right?" Pell stared at her as though she had said something in a foreign language. "He stood up in front of the whole pack and rejected you," Pell said. "He humiliated you." "I know," Seraphine said. "Is he all right?" She genuinely wanted to know. That was the truest and most complicated thing about her. She was not performing goodness. She was not trying to seem kind. She simply could not stop being interested in the reality of another person, even a person who had hurt her, even him. 3 weeks after the rejection, on a gray Tuesday morning, she was on her knees in the garden working at the base of an overgrown rose bush when she heard the gate. She looked up, and he was standing there. He was wearing a dark coat and no guards, and an expression she had never seen on him before. She had seen him commanding. She had seen him careful. She had seen him distant, in the specific way of a man who has decided distance is safer than feeling. She had not seen him like this, hollowed out, like a lantern with no light inside. She did not stand. She waited. He opened his mouth. Something crossed his face. He closed it again. Then he said, roughly, and without any of the careful architecture she suspected he had prepared, "I was afraid of you. Not you exactly. What you made me feel. I destroyed something real because I was a coward, and I am sorry. Not because of Kale, before I knew about any of that." He stopped. His hands were at his sides. He was not reaching for her, not asking for anything. He was just standing in the dirt in his good coat, saying what was true. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I know I don't have the right to. I needed you to know that I knew what I did." Seraphine looked at him for a long moment. A bird was working noisily at something in the hedge behind her, completely unbothered by the Alpha King in the garden. "I know you were afraid," she said finally. I could see it. Even then, he had not expected that. She watched it land on him. "It did not make it hurt less," she added. "But I knew." He nodded once, slowly. There was nothing else to say, and he seemed to understand that. He thanked her for listening. He left. He came back the following week, not to ask for anything, but to fix the gate, which had been hanging at an angle since her aunt's time. He did not mention the wolf, or the bond, or any of it. He fixed the gate, and asked how the rosebush was doing, and left when the work was done. The week after that he brought seeds, not a grand gesture, just a paper packet of the pale blue salvia she had once mentioned in passing, months ago, in a conversation she had not thought he was paying attention to. He had been paying attention. He kept coming back. Not with speeches, not with promises, not with the kind of large and overwhelming gestures that are often really about the person making them. He came back with small, consistent, unglamorous presents. He showed up and did useful things, and asked nothing in return, and went home. Every time she opened the gate and let him in, she was making a choice. He had begun to understand that it had always been a choice, hers to make, and his only job was to give her something worth choosing. He had spent his whole life believing that power was the answer to everything. His father had been a strong alpha and a broken man, and Darian had watched love unravel him, and he had decided at 15 years old, standing at a graveside in the rain, that he would never be undone. He had built himself into something that could not be undone. Walls and titles and the enormous cold fact of his authority. And then Seraphine had looked at him, not at the title, but at him, with those clear and honest eyes that saw exactly what was there, and he had felt the walls begin to loosen, and it had terrified him so completely that he had destroyed everything rather than let them fall. Without his wolf, he was just a man. He sat through council meetings as just a man. He held the territory together as just a man, through diplomacy and nerve, and the sheer accumulated respect he had built over 11 years, because the physical authority was gone. 2 border packs sent scouts, and then retreated when they found the situation more stable than they had hoped. His council watched him navigate it all and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. He was doing it, without Kale, without the shift, without the part of himself he had thought was the most essential part. He discovered, slowly and painfully, that he was more than he had thought, that the qualities he had always attributed to his wolf, his instincts, his patience, his ability to read a room, were his own. They had always been his own. He also discovered that being alone in a way he had chosen was very different from being alone in a way that had been taken. He had chosen isolation for years and called it strength. Now the isolation sat on him like weather. Some mornings he woke and reached inward for the familiar presence of his wolf, and found nothing, and the absence was a lesson he received freshly each time. Kale returned on a night in late autumn. Darian was standing at the window of his chambers when he felt it. He had stopped expecting it, the way you stop expecting a letter that is overdue by months. It arrived the way things arrive when you have stopped watching for them. Quietly, completely, with no warning. He felt warmth flood back into a part of himself that had gone cold. He felt the great black wolf unfurl inside him like something waking from a long sleep, stretching, settling, present again. He went outside without his coat into the cold night, and shifted before he had fully thought it through, and it happened easily, and completely, the way breathing happens, and he stood in the frost-pale grass, and tipped his head back, and howled. It was not a triumphant sound. It was too old for that, and too honest. It was the sound of a man who had lost something irreplaceable, and been given it back, and knew, bone deep, that he had not earned the return, so much as been offered a second chance, at becoming someone who deserved it. In the cottage on the eastern edge of the territory, Seraphine heard it. She was standing at her kitchen window with a cup of tea she had not yet drunk. The sound came through the dark from far away, rising, and then fading into the trees. She stood very still and listened to the whole of it. And when it was gone, she felt something stir in the hollow place where the bond had been. Not the old bond. That was gone for good, severed cleanly as a cut rope. Something else. Something new and careful, like a shoot coming up through cold ground, not knowing yet how tall it would grow. She pressed her free hand to her chest. She let herself feel it. She did not know how the story would end. She had stopped needing to. She had learned, in the garden, in the long ordinary mornings, in the small and honest work of rebuilding a life after something had broken it, that you do not always need to see the end of the road. You only need to know that the ground is still there, that you are still standing on it. He would come back to the garden on Friday. She had not told him that. She had decided it quietly, to herself, without drama. He would come, and she would open the gate, and they would begin, carefully and slowly, learning what it looked like to be two people choosing each other, rather than being assigned to each other by fate. The moon goddess, the old text said, does not give gifts without reason. She had given them each other, and one of them had refused the gift, and she had responded with the honesty of a force that does not soften its truths to protect the feelings of the powerful. And then she had waited. She was very patient, the old text said, endlessly patient, but she was not without a sense of rightness, of things settling back into the shape they were always meant to hold. Outside, the moon was rising. Full and white and calm, it lit the garden, the overgrown rosebush, the carefully mended gate, and the small stone cottage where a woman stood at a window and felt, for the first time in a long time, something that was not quite hope, but was very close to it. She turned away from the window. She finished her tea. She went to bed. She slept soundly, and she did not reach for anything in the dark, and she did not need to. She was still here. She had always been here. That, in the end, was enough to begin with.